Hello, class, and welcome to This Week in Creativity. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie. This week, our theme is the brain and creativity. Now, one thing that you should be aware of, if you aren't already, is that there are different brain areas that are associated with different tasks within life. Our frontal lobe is involved in planning and executive function, for example. Our occipital lobe is involved in visual interpretation. Our limbic system is involved in processing emotion. And just like different parts of our brain have different tasks that they focus on, different parts of our brain are involved in the creative process as well. And so that's what we'll be taking a look at today, as well as turning into looking a little bit at how we can enhance creativity a little bit. So, as you might expect, the activation of the brain is different depending upon the task and depending upon whether or not the individual is actively deliberately solving a problem, or whether the problem solving is coming to the person spontaneously. Of course, there was also the issue of individual differences that we need to keep in mind, and the individual approach to creativity and in creative ability, and also in creative propensity of the individual. And finally, there's the whole issue of the reduction of the inhibitory processes that take place in the prefrontal cortex of the brain that can facilitate the creative process. So these are all things that we, of course, need to be aware of, but what I want to focus on right now is the activation of associational networks. So, if we think of creativity as the forming of associational zones into new creative networks, now what researchers suggest is that the more remote different items, different cognitive items are, these different cognitive items, the more novel the creative associations will be when they are brought together. So one of the useful and interesting ways of looking at association zones is by studying the phenomenological experience of synesthesia, for example. Now, I'm sure we have at least one or two synesthetes in this course, and if you're not sure or don't remember what synesthesia is, it's when you experience an activation in one sense from the sensory organ of another sense. So, for example, smelling a sound or seeing a smell. Now, you need to kind of remember that synesthesia is a brain state in which the individual associates, and it can be phenomenologically something like the individual associates sounds and smells with sights in unusual ways. In essence, they might hear colors. They may see individual letters of the alphabet as colors, or they may associate individual letters of the alphabet with musical notes. So when they read, they may hear parts of a musical scale, for example. There are really a myriad of ways of synesthesia that may be manifest within a person's experiences, and it seems to be that it is a neurological condition, but we can learn something from that neurological condition, and that is there are some sort of cross waves that go on, some kind of cross wiring that goes on. Part of that might be within the thalamus, where because the thalamus is kind of an antechamber for a lot of sensory modalities, but it may be in other association areas as well. One of the prominent researchers in the field is D.S. Ramachandran, and his research suggests that synesthetes are more likely to be engaged in creative activities or careers. A matter of fact, about 7 or 8 times more likely than people in the general population. They also score higher on remote associate tasks. And that's a test for the activation of broad associational networks. However, they have not scored higher on divergent thinking tasks. So the conclusion of this is that synesthetes are better at bottom-up access to associational networks, but are not necessarily better able to use them flexibly. In other words, they may spontaneously make associations, but being able to direct those associations in a particular direction may not be particularly enhanced by synesthesia. So researchers have shown that synesthetes have, in brain scanners have found that the unusual brain wiring, some of it at least, appears to be activated in parts of the temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes. So in that connection area, that interface area between the temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes, which has been called, and neuropsychologists call this the associational zones, because there can be some unusual associations that all seem to come together here. And that's really intuitively what we see a lot of times, is some strong associational activation that takes place within synesthetes. And so we can at least start to have a sense that this convergent area of associational zones is an area that can bring together some creative connections within the brain. And this might be a good place to look for the basis, for example, of metaphorical thought, because metaphor is basically bringing together one concept with another construct, just like what we have with the processing of this sensory information in synesthetes. So maybe this unusual wiring that allows unusual associations to be taking place is a signpost of a direction that we can go in starting to understand this. Now, what is really interesting is that this hyperconnectivity or unusual connectivity within the brain is also seen with people with prodromal schizophrenia. And we've discussed earlier the relationship between prodromal schizophrenia or schizotypal personality and creativity. So perhaps there is some unusual wiring that's going on that allows parts of the brain to be connected in certain individuals that wouldn't be connected ordinarily. And this gives them access to unusual associational connections. So there seems to be some creative hotspots in the brain, in the bottom part of that associational area. So that's something that I find very interesting. So when we think about possible consideration of the genesis of creativity, it does seem that response to novelty is an important aspect, as well as unusual patterns of connectivity. So the main findings from the brain areas are that novelty seeking is important, as well as transient disinhibition that allows conscious areas of the brain to be represented in unconscious areas, and more unusual associations when these are combined with cognitive strengths, such as working memory capacity. Then creativity is enhanced. And not just working memory capacity, but also higher IQ can enhance creativity when all these other factors are brought in. And all of these things can be trained. And that's the thing I really want to highlight, not only this class, but the next class, which leads us nicely to our topic of enhancing our creativity and training our brain. Now, the question comes, can you really train your brain? Can you enhance your brain functioning? And the answer is absolutely yes. While some people may have a predisposition to certain aspects of creative skills and ideation, everybody can enhance their creativity. And everybody has the apparatus in our marvelous creative brains to be able to bring this out in some way. We need to think and act creatively. And we need to train these different mindsets, and we need to practice them a little bit. But we all have the innate latent hardware that we need to be creative, assuming that our brain is working as it is intended. So, brain imaging studies show that the activation of certain neural patterns can are activated in creative work, and that they work flexibly, and that they move between creative patterns. And so Shelley Carson calls these changes in creative work, she calls them brain sets. So if you're doing one creative work and another creative work, they might require different cognitive tasks. And so Shelley Carson identifies these as brain sets. So by mimicking these creative patterns, we can enhance our own creativity. And there's abundant research that we can indeed change our brain patterns and learn to manipulate them. And several areas of research that indicate this include cognitive rehabilitation programs, because, for example, soldiers who have suffered from traumatic brain injuries have been a focus of a lot of neuroscience research particularly over the past 2 or 3 decades. And so there's a lot of research to support the area of cognitive rehabilitation and how people with brain injury can regain their functioning. And it turns out that the brain is so plastic that we can regain a lot of skills that are lost. Or if you haven't lost your skills, you can enhance your skills through these cognitive rehabilitation programs. And that includes increasing your sustained attention, includes increasing all the aspects required for creativity. It includes increasing your focal attention. It includes increasing your working memory capacity and improving your short-term and long-term memory. So these are some of the things that we can enhance. We also know that we can increase our cognitive flexibility. These are things that we have learned from cognitive rehabilitation programs and research in cognitive rehabilitation therapy, because it shows that you can actually change neurotransmitter release patterns through behavioral change and through cognitive practice change. So we have a lot of research that indicates that you can, in fact, through practice, through behavior, through training, change your ability to change your brain activation patterns. And so, in theory and in practice, you can change and develop your brain states. These brain sets, these brain activation patterns. And so some of your brain activation patterns are things like connect and reason and envision and activate and transform and evaluate and stream. And what this spells is creates, thanks to Shelley Carson's research at Harvard. So CREATES is a good mnemonic for the kinds of brain sets that go into creativity. So let's start with connect. Connect. So there's a connect brain set where you connect a brain set that actively makes associations from disparate, different areas. And in this modality, in this brain state, you are using high activity in the associational cortices. And this is a brain state that you want to be in if you were, for example, brainstorming, for instance, or if you were trying to activate associational networks broadly, or if you were engaged in divergent thinking tasks. So the first one is connect. The next brain set is reason. The reason brain set is, and the reason we call the brain set this is because it is the biological equivalent to a brain set. And when when you're in a brain state, different brain states completely change cognitive facilities, for instance. If you are in a particular brain set, you have access to different memories. That means state-dependent memories. You see the world differently, have different perceptions that you attend to, and you solve problems differently. So your brain association state dictates different activities, cognitive abilities that are taking place. So that's just a little bit of a tangent. So we're all looking at reason, the reason brain set, the brain activation. That's where you take the state of conscious and deliberate planning. So when you're setting goals, for example, or purposely trying to solve a problem, even if your problem is where you're going first thing tomorrow morning. So am I going to go to the dry cleaning first, or am I going to go to the convenience store first, or am I going to stop at Tim Hortons first? These are all consciously planned in a sequential manner, and that is cognitive. It's sequential thought. So reason is sequential thought. And so that is the reason brain set. So we had connect, then we had reason, then we come to envision. And this is associated with visual imagery and mental imagery, and associated with imaginative thinking. So if you're doing, what if scenarios, for example, or if you're trying to imagine what the world would be like if everybody had two heads, then you've been activating the envision brain set or brain state. Then there's activate, and this is a receptive state where you are receptive to incoming stimuli in a non-judgmental and disinhibited way. You are not judging the information, you're just absorbing information from your environment, or absorbing information that is generated within your brain. So it is being open to the world as it truly is, not how you want it to be. In many ways, it's a state of utter and complete cognitive honesty. Then there's the T, transform. And in the transform state, this is a negative mood. This is when you're in a bad mood. Maybe you're experiencing anxiety, or experiencing mild depression or mild anger. And what are you going to do with that negative brain state? Well, the suggestion here is that you take that negative emotional energy and you sublimate it, as Freud would say. Or you channel it into a creative activity. So you're taking some kind of emotional energy that you have, and you're channeling it into or transforming it into a creative activity. That's the whole idea of the transform brain state. Then we come to the evaluate brain state. And that is naturally what it just means. It's to be a very judgmental state of mind, where you are evaluating what is going on, where you're judging things in a way that this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is better, and this one's the best. That's the kind of idea behind the evaluate brain state. And then finally, in this whole creates mnemonic from Shelley Carson, we have stream. And stream is similar to Csikszentmihalyi's idea of flow. A brain state when you're in stream is when you feel like you are not consciously directing your moods, your movements, your actions, and yet your movements and actions are moving in an appropriate way. They're streaming from your unconscious areas of your brain almost automatically, and not through some conscious guidance. So, for example, if you're playing a musical instrument or playing a sport and hitting a ball across a field, you're doing it almost automatically, as if it were in slow motion, and you're not having to reflectively think upon it. Also, writers get into a state where they almost automatically write, but the ideas are flowing from unconscious areas of the brain through their hands, and they're almost bypassing their cognitive processes and their conscious cognitive processes. And so it's this kind of flow state where there's a transformation of time and things just seem to come automatically. Therefore, we call this stream. So that's some of the brain states that have been identified by Shelley Carson. The connect brain state, the reason brain state, the envision brain state, the activate brain state, the transform brain state, the evaluate brain state, and the streams brain state. And then we can kind of talk a little bit about how we can enhance our creativity. And we'll look at this a little bit more in the class following this. But for right now, I want to cover two of the most successful programs for enhancing creativity, at least in terms of group creativity enhancement. So, for example, we have what is known as the 6 hats technique that was developed by Edward de Bono. And it is an extremely successful and highly profitable commercial program. So, the 6 hats technique is used by a number of major organizations around the world and is a way of team problem solving or group creative problem solving. And the idea behind it is to pair the right kind of thinking techniques to the right kind of creative process, which is very similar to the creates brain sets of Shelley Carson. And the difference is that the 6 hats technique was developed by watching groups going through the creative process, where the creates brain sets by Shelley Carson was based upon neuroimaging research. So they're coming to the same conclusion, but they're coming at the whole creative problem from 2 different directions. But it's very interesting how they so overlap so well. So the suggestion made by de Bono in the 6 hats technique is that the creative process can be enhanced if you begin with the right process. So he suggests that you begin with white hat thinking. And each type of thinking is associated essentially with a different type of hat, different color hat. So if you're conditioned to think about a certain color hat when you're doing a certain type of thinking, then automatically in the future, if you do this enough, every time you put on your white hat, metaphorically speaking, figuratively speaking, or you put on your black hat in your mind, it will automatically throw you into a different type of thinking style. And it's basically to get you recognizing that there are different types of thinking styles, and when you know how to use these different types of thinking styles at different stages in your project, then you can be more successful. So it's actually very clever. The white hat is associated with data and information collection, for example. So with our knowledge of the creative process, this would be associated with the preparation stage of creativity. Then there's the red hat, and that's associated with emotions and intuition regarding the project. And De Bono chose the red hat because fire and warmth are associated with emotion and intuition, and good intuition might otherwise be suppressed if you weren't given time during the process to use it. You need to spend your emotional reactions to a particular project in order to be able to use that power within the project. Then the black hat is associated with critical judgment, and he chose the black because it's a reminder of the robes that judges wear, stern judges. And this may prevent the group from making silly, foolish, or illegal mistakes. And it's to be used, but it's to be used judiciously because you don't want to squelch the creative process. Then there's the yellow hat, and that is to be optimistic when you're searching for the benefits of the project. And it's named for sunshine. It's very important to understand what the benefits of the project are so that you can increase your positive affect within the group as you go about building this project. And you're able to then generate enthusiasm and intrinsic motivation to continue with the group. Then there's the green hats, and that's associated with creative and divergent thinking. And he associates this with green because it's associated with the fertile ground of vegetation. Then there's the blue hat, and that's associated with organization and overview. So think of blue sky. You're looking down from the blue sky. You're looking down on the project, and this dictates the next stage. So you can have an overview, and you can start to plan out what's the next stage to come in this project. So the 6 hats project suggests that the order of the hats is going to depend upon the type of project that you're doing. And you may have to switch back and forth between the different hats during the creative process. And just want you to keep in mind that it's useful because it conditions you to think a certain way by associating each type of thinking with different colored hats. So you can simply go online and Google, and I've included a 6 hats technique journal article for you to read. And we'll kind of delve into how we can enhance creativity a little bit more next week as well. Then we come to brainstorming. And that's another group project way of enhancing creativity. And the idea of brainstorming was actually developed way back in the 1930s by Alex Osborne. And it's become so popular that it has entered into our common lexicon, and we really think of it independently of the actual formal brainstorming program that it came out of. But in the original brainstorming program, the idea was to get people together to generate uncritical and rapid ideas. And the most important element was to defer judgment until later on in the process. So a person has to be free to throw out ideas, no matter how silly or untenable they may seem at the time. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of studies have been done on brainstorming, and it seems that brainstorming is less effective when people are sitting around in a group and everybody throws out ideas. That's less effective than if individuals are generating their ideas independently and then presenting them anonymously to the group. So one way of doing this through the group is to go through this process by having everybody, giving everybody the problem, And then everybody has small note cards that they generate 3 or 4 different solutions to the problem. And then all the cards are gathered up and given to a moderator who reads out the individual ideas. And again, nobody takes ownership of the ideas, and then individuals in the group can build upon these ideas. And once the building process has been exhausted, then you can move on to the next idea. Again, the idea of the judgment of the idea is reserved for later in the process. Now, why is it, do you think, that people will not, in a group, generate as good ideas as individuals themselves will generate? And then pulling the ideas afterwards. Well, typically it's because of inhibition and anxiety. To speak out within a group, there's fear of judgment. So one of the things that researchers have found is that every group, no matter how democratic that group might try to be, there is still a hierarchy within the group, and some people have more power and some people have less power in that group, or perceive that they have less power within the group. And so some are more freely throwing out ideas, and some are avoiding throwing out ideas because they perceive that they have less power within the group. So they're less free to throw out ideas than others would be, because they're fearing judgment from those that they perceive to have higher power within the group. So there's some unconscious judgment that goes on, or fear of unconscious judgment by others within the group. So it's a way of avoiding that prejudging of ideas, because we're still worried about judgment of others. So consequently, you can write down your ideas, then you present them anonymously, then you feel more free to throw out ideas that might be a little more divergent in their thinking. Another issue is with people speaking out is that when you're listening to someone else, you are processing what they are saying rather than processing your own ideas. And when other people say something, it may also influence the direction of your thinking, so you have less ability to process new and creative ideas for yourself. So, that's a little bit about brainstorming and a little bit about brain and creativity and enhancing your creativity and beginning to develop and enhance our brain states a little to facilitate the creative process. And we'll flesh this out a little bit more in the coming weeks. I hope you enjoyed this week. You take care. Bye-bye.